Hey everybody, it's Dave F., the host of Boiled as an Owl. Today we're bringing you episode 11. We're talking about step 5. The first season ended with episode 10, and we had essentially been talking about step 4, the inventory process, and how to do it, what to do with it, and essentially how to navigate it all. What we're going to talk about today is step 5. Step 5 is the step where you're ready to share it, and you share it with somebody you trust. There could be moments when you're doing your inventory process where you're unsure of who you're going to share the vast majority of the findings with. In the big book, it says you could share it with a priest, you could share it with a friend, you could share it with a spouse, you could share it with your sponsor. Sometimes you can bring a lot of stuff up into the inventory process. You might feel like you're going to be judged. You might feel like saying whatever you need to say to somebody who you quote unquote trust might backfire. Maybe you feel shame and guilt around some of the stuff that you need to share. You've compiled this list of resentments. You've done the fact-checking part where you're like, okay, what is this affecting? My ego, my sexual relationships, my relationships in general, my pocketbook. You've narrowed all of it down, and now you've also conquered the part where you've been able to see your part in all of it. What people don't understand is, why do I have to share this with somebody? It's between God and I, and God knows everything. So why does someone else have to come into the picture? Well, a lot of times it's due to humility. It's humbling yourself and bringing this compilation to someone's attention other than yourself, because we're really good at lying. We're really good at lying to ourselves, and we're really good at hiding truths and coming forth with half-truths and all that good stuff, right? So we need to come clean, as it were, to another individual, because then this action holds us accountable to ourselves, right? I could do some really questionable things with my behaviors, and I could be trying to control, manipulate, lie, cheat, steal, and I could fall back on the ideology of, oh, hey, my higher power knows all this stuff anyway, so who really cares? We're going with somebody that we trust to give them the details of our inventory. There are certain things we say, and there's certain things we don't say, and there's certain things that we need to make sure that we are covering in such a way that the person that we're sharing it with is going to see what they need to see, hear what they need to hear, and hopefully you're not going to be in a place where you're going to feel shame, guilt, and judgment. Chances are you are going to feel that stuff on some level, only because when you look at the ramifications of your behavior and you see the pain and the discomfort you might have caused others, you start really having a sense of remorse around the things you did. If you knew why you were doing the things you were doing, you probably wouldn't have done them. That's something that we really come to terms with when we are working with inventory, because you're coming clean. If you have a good sponsor, your sponsor is going to help you navigate all that, and you're not going to have to worry too much about feeling shame and remorse and guilt and all this other stuff, because you're going to learn through this process a lot of the patterns that you've developed, a lot of the coping mechanisms you developed, and even this false sense of personality. I'll give you an example myself. I am someone who can be quite loud, quite obnoxious. I could be jamming out to tunes in my car and I can justify it And people in the parking lot are like, oh, this guy's listening to some serious tunes, giving me the side eye. I don't care because that's just who I am, right? But that's not just who I am, because there's a part of me that tries to be super respectful of other people and their places and their spaces, and also understands that there's more than just me walking on this planet. So that said, when I am allowing myself to be aligned with my higher power, and I'm trying to be aligned with thought, word, and deed, meaning my mouth is doing one thing, my feet are doing the same thing as my mouth, instead of I'm saying something, but my feet are going in the opposite direction. When we have that personality trait, we got to make sure that that personality trait is dialed in from the perspective of character assets and behavioral assets. We need to make sure that how we project ourselves into the world is still not coming from these subsets or categories of what we think the world wants to see us be. So step 5 is a really cool exercise in that you're sharing all this stuff with another human being, regardless of how dysfunctional it might be. And don't relegate your inventory to just the bad things, because you're a multidimensional human being. You've done some really good stuff in your life too. And just because you have done bad stuff doesn't mean you're not a good person. We're all trying to do the best we can. And some of us get to that point quicker. Some of us get there slower. And it is all about understanding why you do what you do, when you do it, how you do it, and how you have to change doing it. Had a dissertation when I did my inventory. I had so much detail and so much structure to my inventory, and I felt bad for my sponsor. I mean, we had to do it in 3 visits that ended up being a couple hours each visit. I was at a point where I just wanted everything out on paper, and I wanted to do whatever it took to get through to the other side. I knew that I was lying, that I was manipulating, and that I wasn't being honest with myself and others. So I made a huge effort to go above and beyond. If we have been honest and thorough with our personal inventories, we've listed and analyzed our character defects and have a record of the harm we have caused others. We have a list of our greater handicaps, imperfections, and the names of the people who have suffered as a result of our unmanageable lives and insane behavior. These facts indicate certain defects in our lives. They constitute the record we have made of our wrongs. We have ascertained our defects and not only propose to correct them, but also to prepare a plan of action that will bring restitution and happiness to the men and women who have suffered mental, physical, or financial harm as a direct result of our uncontrolled drinking. We literally are concocting a plan of action as to how we're going to make restitution and bring happiness and joy to the people that we've caused a lifetime of suffering. Parents, children, spouses, good friends, the people that had to see us in our devolved state, if you will, of the drinking and the lying and the insanity of the things that we did. Step 5 is essentially we took the action of the inventory. Now we're preparing to do something with the inventory, and we're preparing to figure out how we're going to try to stop being who we were. The alcohol is but a symptom. It's always just a symptom because it's the thinking that gets you to the drinking. And if you don't correct the thoughts, which become beliefs, once you think something long enough, it becomes a belief. And it also helps to define the way in which you carry yourself and the direction in which you carry yourself. You have these thoughts, mostly insane, not all, but mostly, And then when you have the thought, it's creating the belief. And once you have the belief structure in place, you are now running the show based on these beliefs. A belief doesn't just happen overnight. You have to behave a certain way, think a certain way, and then output a certain way. And eventually, if you think something long enough, it becomes a belief. For a lot of alcoholics, we lie to ourselves because we like to sugarcoat the problematic behaviors that we present to the world. I know in my case, I had to look at that stuff when I was, talking to my sponsor and being like, oh, that's awful. I can't believe I did that. I can't believe I said that. My second wife was her favorite relative was dying. And I was so upset with her this one evening. And I said, what, you get to act so high and mighty now because your aunt's dying? You talk about an asshole. That was the most asshole-ish thing I think I could have ever said. And I said it because I was angry and I didn't care because I was in pain, because I needed her attention and her affection. And oh my God, my feelings were freaking through the roof. And I wasn't getting my way. So I chose violence. I chose violent communication, and I drove a wedge so deep into my marriage at that point. And don't get me wrong, there was so much other shit that I could talk hours about, but I won't. I'm keeping it to what I did. So I deliberated that evening about that, and I called an abuse hotline and started talking to the guy on the phone. Hey, this is what I did. And that dude was like, wow, you have a very codependent belief system, and that was very abusive, and you should probably seek out help. And I did. I started working with a therapist. As I was working with my therapist, in so much shame, because I was in a group with other men who had beaten the shit out of their wives. They were in a place where they were so angry and felt so bad, and they were physically hurting the people in their lives. And I was verbally abusive, and it was always around drinking and being high on something. I lost my capacity to actually think before I did something, so much so that every time that we would argue, her inadequacies would edge up against my inadequacies, and the two of us would be like two children fighting in a sandbox. But the problem is we were adults, lots of loud yelling, and it scared people. It was awful. And that's the thing with me. Like, I tend to get very loud, very angry while drinking. I've actually, in my sobriety, have gotten there a few times where the trigger in my brain just snapped me into the behavior, and it was like a flood. Instead of taking pause, I was human, and I didn't have the bearings I should have had, and I did some damage in sobriety too. We need to see these self-appraisals, and need to become humble. The humility that step 5 brings is so necessary to our sober welfare later on, because we can always go back to our inventory, which is great because we can always look and we can always see the patternings again, and we can do the work. And what's great about having fellowship in any kind of recovery program you're in is if you utilize the fellowship correctly and you make friends in recovery, they become your checks and balances, because you get to talk to them. And as you're talking to them, you get to see how insane you still are. I had spoken about not having a relationship with my parents at this point, and yesterday was pretty cool. I reached out to my mother a couple days ago and said, hey, you want to go for coffee? All inner workings were like, don't do it, it's a trap. But I knew that if I didn't do it, I wouldn't grow. You're staying away from the people that cause you issues for your self-care and all this other bullshit that we convince ourselves about. I didn't get abused or anything from my parents like other people might have. So I'm not directing this at anyone else who might have experienced any kind of physical, sexual, or very deep mental abuse. I'm talking about as you move forward in life. And I know that if I keep running away from a problem and I don't correct the course that I'm heading on, I'm not really growing, because the growth happens in the discomfort. I went and met my mother for coffee yesterday, and I prayed my ass off. I asked God to keep me calm. I asked God to keep her calm. And I just asked God to intervene in this conversation because I really didn't want it to go sideways. I spoke to a friend and we talked about things, and he imparted some wisdom, which was, hey man, stay calm and do the do. And I did. I did the do. And I had put a 1 hour time limit on it, and we ended up talking for almost 3 hours. What I realized is that just like myself, my mother is suffering. She's suffering. Life is kicking her ass in a lot of different ways, just like I kicked my ass in a lot of different ways. So who am I to hold a grudge if someone's doing the best they can? And if that best isn't what I think it should be, who am I to be so holy as to think that someone else should take the high road and not me? I think we both took the high road. I definitely took the high road. I recognized a bunch of patterns and I recognized a bunch of behaviors. And I realized that not having my son in my life really sucks. It hurts. And I hate it. I wish I could take it all back, but I can't. And it sucks. It really does. But what I learned was that I really miss him. The discussion was pretty deep at times, and through the mirror that she provided in the discussion, I got to see that I still have a lot of work to do in my own belief system. I saw my own victimhood, and I saw a lot of the issues that I still have from inventory and different patternings and the way I navigate life still. It's intense. It was interesting because talking to her yesterday was almost like bearing my soul. And as I was talking, I realized I had a lot of unconscious old thoughts and a lot of I wanted to shout. And I'm glad I kept my cool. I was doing a lot of deep breathing and I was doing a lot of praying during this whole thing, And I realized that I have such a weird belief system in place. For as far as I've come in my recovery, I know I have so much more to go, and I'm happy about that because I don't ever want to be static enough to think that I don't have more growing to do. I also realize that I don't want to get trapped in the constant need to be healing. I don't want to be trapped in that bullshit. What I realized is that healing is a trap sometimes. That if we stay in that energy too long, we can convince ourselves that we have so much more to go and we have so much more to do. We're not good enough and we're not whole enough. And if I don't do enough healing, how can I have a successful relationship with others? Here's the deal. If you don't take the step to start the journey, you're never going to get anywhere. And that is what I realized when I was talking to my mother. I guess staying away did a disservice to everybody. I did believe that it was in my best interest to stay away. And, the people who know me know that that was not an easy decision for me. But I did it because I needed to. I'm not angry at myself for having done what I did. Being alone on my own for the last year and a half really helped me understand a lot of things. And I did the best that I could do, even in my sobriety. When I started doing the recording of this podcast, it really made me look into a lot of deeper issues that I still have to face and that I still need God's grace to help me get through. Some things need to end for better things to begin. And my drinking, my drugging, that had to end so that I could go on to bigger and better things and start becoming the person that God meant for me to become. I'm in alignment with that, and I'm proud of myself because I've come so far in such a short span of time, and I'm so blessed to know that I have so much more time. I lived more than half of my life, and who knows if I'm going to get to 80 or 90. Maybe I have 30 more years left, and that's great because I could do a lot in 30 years. That's why step 5 is so important, because when you really break down your character and your personality and all the aspects of who you think you really are that are buried underneath this projected behavior that's affecting everyone, and you get a sense of the real you, it's kind of amazing. You capture that in the 5th step. Because as you talk to your sponsor about all the stuff that you uncovered, you get to be asked, do you still want to do that? And you hopefully say, no, I'm good, man. I think I learned what I need to. And don't get me wrong. We go back where we go back all the time. We take, 15 steps forward, and then there's like 13 steps back. And it's okay, because healing is not a straight line. It's a scribble drawing, And I think like all the parts of us that want attention, they coast for a little while. And then when we're not being honest, open, and willing, we find the discomfort in the behaviors. I can't do what I used to do 10 years ago, because it sucks, and I can't be an asshole. I mean, I am an asshole in a good way, but that's also a projection. That's also a piece of my personality that helps me get rejected and helps me justify manipulation and control. And it's still hard for me to tell somebody when the need isn't being met, and I still struggle with this idea of being selfish for even having the need. And that was one of the big things that messed up my second marriage. I had this belief that if you truly loved me, you would know what I needed, because my shitty behavior and my bark, my junkyard dog bark should have gotten your attention to know that something was wrong. And that was wrong of me, because I had this belief that if someone truly loves me, I don't need to ask for anything. And that's really stupid, because if I really loved myself, I would ask for what I needed. And you can ask for what you need in a kind, loving, heartfelt way. And it's first by writing down that inventory to see what the behavior is, and then getting to the bottom of that, and then talking it out. I will tell you this, and I told my buddy the other day when we spoke, I love talking to you. You're like a brother I never had. Because when I talk to you and you're just sitting in acceptance and not judging me, I get to see how insane some of the shit that comes out of my mouth is. And then we can laugh about it, And I can really look at it and go, wow, I'm still sick and suffering. But this is why it's so important to do this work. You don't even need to be an alcoholic or a drug addict to do this, because there's a lot of people overeating, having too much sex, doing too much shopping, smoking cigarettes, all these other things that society at large doesn't have a real big issue with. But if it's making your life unmanageable, if it's creating credit card debt, if it's creating the possibility that, you might be getting some sexually transmitted diseases because of the fact that you might be hopping from one person to another, it becomes an issue. You're powerless over the thing. And if it starts getting to a point where you're trying to manipulate and control your life so that you could get the necessities of the addiction of whatever behavior that is met, then yeah, you're struggling. And I really do believe people need a spiritual program. And there's a program for everything. I talk about AA, NA, drugs, alcohol, whatever. But I also believe there's a lot of ground that needs to be covered for a lot of people. The phone is such an ugly addiction at this point, and nobody wants to admit that they're addicted to their phone. My God, I sometimes feel physical pain if I can't check my social media just to make sure somebody's listening to the podcast or somebody watched a video that I posted, because I'm marketing for my business. There's a lot of insanity, man. There is, but we're all getting through it. And it's a wonderful process. And if you can just do what you got to do, my God, this program saves your ass. I am so blessed to have gotten to a faith-based life. The promises that you get, you won't want to shut the door on the past. You're not going to be worried about financial situations. You're not going to be worried about what people think or say about you any longer, because you've owned your shit and you have a boss that is so expansive. It's everything, everywhere. And again, people struggle with it. I don't. But I have a new employer, and my new prayer is, God, can you please take my hands, my feet, my heart, my mind, and take it all and bring me my work so that I can honor you and do what I have to do to help others. That's what it's all about. Most of us are very selfish and self-indulgent, and that's why we struggle with addiction to begin with, because we don't know how to help others, because all we want to do is help ourselves. And I'm not saying everybody. With that, I will end. Thank you for listening. Really appreciate it. If you like what you're hearing, please feel free to drop an email. I just learned this week that people have been listening to this thing. Someone told me that they were able to identify a lot of the behaviors that parents were bringing to the table with addiction issues. Another person said she really enjoyed what I had to say about the recovery process. And that's the magic. That was my whole desire of putting this thing together, was to be able to help people that aren't even in AA or NA. You could listen to this and say, now I understand my father better. I understand my mother better, or my uncle or my brother or sister who's struggling with addiction. I can give them some grace, because I never understood that it was something that you can't even use willpower to fend off. Like, that's the other thing that's crazy about addiction, is like when you get to the tipping point where you have become a full-blown addict, all the willpower in the world isn't enough to help you. I love you all for listening. I love everyone who's been giving me feedback. I really appreciate it. I hope that you listen to this and it sparks something in you to help you get the help you need. You deserve happiness. You deserve joy. You deserve to have the life that you were supposed to have before all your survival shit kicked in and before all the trauma and stuff that you experienced derailed you. You're not your trauma. You're not your hopelessness. You are a byproduct of all that shit. But at the end of the day, the real you is in there somewhere. And I really do believe that if you can understand why you do say and act the way you do, and you can dig out those boulders. You can align yourself to your highest timeline and highest joy. I pray that you get there. I really do. So anyway, let's end the way we typically do, which is the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardships as the pathway to peace, taking, as he did, this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that he will make all things right if I surrender to his will, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him forever in the next. Amen. Have a good one. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in episode 12.